All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises and glory and honor that's due to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashim Rakakwadash. Double honors to the elders, the apostles of Great Millstone. Blessings and salutations to the hopeful elect. Those in the gospel abroad, lifting up the stern of Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai. This is a video focusing on Deuteronomy 28 and 30. And while this scripture applied to many atrocities in our captivity period, mainly when Jake was picking cotton and on the sugar fields and the sugarcane fields. A lot of times Jake would get married to other slave women, other Jake women. But what happened was the master or the slave owner or the slaver will come in and he'd have his way with the woman. Say, I want your woman, boy. Or a lot of times a slave owner would go behind a Jake's back and pop the woman, and he will force the woman to not speak on what had happened, because ultimately, no confusion. Because a lot of times, man, even so much as an Esau being a cup, a lot of times if the Edomite woman find out that the man had sex with one of the slaves, a lot of times the heat will come down on him for doing such. All right, so in this case, we're focusing on this guy by the name of West Ford, which we believe was a son of George Washington, which this evidence came out years ago, not too long ago, but a lot of times it was swept under the rug because it was kind of a disgrace when the slave masters popped the slave women and they got them pregnant. And depending on how dark the child is, they would send the child or sell it off to a different plantation for it to serve slavery with no remembrance of who the father can be. And if they know, they would have to have a hush-hush order, couldn't speak on it, or ultimately they could put you to death. Same thing with kings. A lot of times kings were popping concubines and so forth, and they didn't favor the woman. A lot of times what they'd do, they'd take the kid and they'd sell it off somewhere, or they'd take the woman and the child and they'd move it into a distant city to never be spoke or heard of again, because, that just the order of things. All right, but in this case, we're going to read Deuteronomy 28 and 30. It says, thou should betroth a wife, which betroth goes into, like, you can say engagement or promise to. Like the scriptures say, give thee or give thy daughter unto a man of understanding. So what happens is an Israelite man, he promises his daughter to a particular man in the faith or in Israel that had substance or that was really a follower of Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, because there's nothing greater than a man that follows the Lord outside of his riches and land and so forth, because that's just like saying, well, give your daughter to Kanye West. Yeah, he's a bonehead, but he got this money. No, that's stupid, because a nigga with money ain't always smart. So a man of understanding is really understanding first and foremost the law, statutes, and commandments on how the Most High operates, okay? And the secondary, his substance and his wealth, all right? Which those are secondary things. But nonetheless, you were supposed to promise your daughter to a man of understanding, all right? So let's just say if your daughter was 12 years old, I may have been 17, all right? And you like, well, look, you're going to marry him, all right? And then once, it may be 14, 15 before you get her, depending on you and the agreement you got with the father. And then when he transfer ownership from his ownership to your ownership, then that's how it happens, But overall, you're promised, you're betrothed, all right? But it says here, and another man shall lie with her. That's adultery. It says, thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein, and thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof. Okay, so we're gonna go right into it. I got a few articles, and I got also on Wikipedia. It says, was West Ford the son of George Washington? Now, if you pay attention to these different articles, they beat around the bush in a lot of things, because they would never just come out and say, well, yeah. They will speak about it in a roundabout way and say, well, yeah, DNA says this, but we don't know. Basically putting their own tongue and their own foot in their own mouth. But anyway, let's start here. It says, in many ways, Tomorrow Came Yesterday by Janet Allen, a writer for the Traveler Weekly, Peoria's black newspaper, is a startling book full of stellar stories. It says there's a story of Allen's great-grandfather, Maj George Ford, who learned target practice from Buffalo Bill. It says, was a member of the 10th Cavalry, a segregated black unit, saw action in Custer's Massacre in 1876. But it says, participated in the Spanish-American War and was a friend of notable American leaders such as President Theodore Roosevelt and W.E.B. Du Bois. I went to his elementary school, W.E.B. Du Bois, back in Chicago. But it says, there's a story about a runaway slave lying apparently dead in an open grave, who, when by chance revived, thought it was judgment day and believed he had gone to heaven. But it says, but most startlingly, and the story tomorrow came yesterday, is one that has yet made it to the official U.S. history books. It says it is the story of how the eye of George Washington was caught by a beautiful slave woman named Venus, whom he literally sexually molested, so he raped her, basically. All right, because a lot of times too, it was a lot of men that suffered sexual abuse from the slave masters too. You know, it was more or less the male that was raping the male. You know, like an Edomite slave, would come in and hey, he'll rape Jake. You know, he'll rape his woman too. But a lot of those presidents and a lot of those Edomite slaves, like Columbus, they had their ways with a lot of Jake men. Okay, and it it explains, like, when you come back in the reincarnation, how the Lord put that unclean spirit on you, man. That spirit, that's where a lot of these moles come from. You know, that judgment, that desire that the Most High put on you to desire the same sex. You know, the Most High put a demon on you. He put a reprobate spirit because you're rejected. Makes sense. But anyway, it says here, Venus became pregnant and eventually gave birth to a son. It says this son, West Ford, is Allen's great-great-great-great-grandfather, making Allen the direct descendant of America's first president. Okay, so hey, Deuteronomy 28 and 30, that's the spirit, because hey, she was a black woman. And I found out that this baby West Ford came out as dark as night. So you already know George Washington didn't want anything to do with it, because for the simple fact the baby was too dark. So what he did was sold it into slavery, just like a typical Jake. And when you go into, when Howard Shai said, what about the wheat and the tares, he says, look, don't burn them up yet, let them grow together, because you're going to have wheat among the tares, all right? Because the tares are the ones that look like Israelites, but they have hedonistic fathers, whether it's Moabite, Ammonite, Ishmaelite, you know, or Edomite. They all considered tares. Like if you look at Tia Tamara, and also you look at, I believe they have a brother named Taj, and I believe Diana Ross's son, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that their fathers are so-called Jews, you know. But I know Tia and Tamara, without a doubt, they're tares. But you can't tell. They look like so-called black women. They got the dark skin, they light skin. I mean, they almost got the texture hair, you know. But yet, if you pay attention to their mannerisms, they're very kooky and weird. Okay, they seems kind of unbalanced or discombobulated. All right, and you ever seen them dance? Like Tia and Tamara, they can't dance if you pay them. All right, that's how you know that they ain't Israelites. I'm not saying every Israelite will know how to dance, but it's just the fact you can kind of pick up on the sauce. They don't have the sauce, so to speak. They ain't got the sauce, you know. But it says here, it is an old story in the Allen family, one told supposedly by West Ford to his children. And if you look at him, I mean, he kind of did look like him a little bit. It says to his children, who didn't pass it on to their children, and so on to the present, but one kept quiet for generations because the fear of racial reprisals, right? Because it was consequences behind it. And once again, y'all got to excuse that noise. They're working on the outside of the building. But it says, but the story, however, may hold more than a germ of truth. It says at least one expert on Washington, Henry Winnick, author of An Imperfect God, George Washington, his slaves, and the creation of America, agrees that Allens were at least kin to the man who was arguably America's greatest president. Right. Even if Washington himself is not a West Ford's father. But Allen, however, stands by a story. He says, we're trying to claim our heritage with the Washingtons, Allen said. But the fable was that he had no children because he was sterile. But in our family tree, they're saying that West Ford is the child of George Washington. All right, so you see how they're trying to do away with it. You seeing how they're trying to basically write it off. You know, they're trying to say, well, nah, this ain't happening. He's sterile. He couldn't have kids. Which a lot of those Edomite presidents, man, they like you. They was dealing with one another. You know, Esau was big for that. Edomite men being on Edom. That was big. And it's still big among Esau today. And it's big among Jake too. All right. So anyway, it says, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her, and thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein, and thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof. All right. And I'm going to go down to 32. It says, and thy sons and thy daughters should be given unto another people, and thy eyes should look and fill with longing for them all day long, and there should be no might in thy hand. All right, because like I said, he was basically sold into slavery too. He didn't grow up in the White House, or he didn't grow up getting the benefits of Esau Edom. Instead, he grew up just like the other Jakes. All right, because he looked like one. Nonetheless, he was an Edomite. But anyway, it says, but Allen isn't the first in our family to write a book about West Fort, George Washington, and a slave woman named Venus. It says our sister, Linda Allen Bryant, published I Cannot Tell a Lie in 2001, which contained an early account of West Fort's conception and birth. But Allen's self-published book is based on additional research, but contentions by the Allen family that they are descendants of the Washington made the pages of Newsweek, Time, and a German weekly magazine, Dr. Spiegel, or Der Spiegel, and other publications, including the New York Times in the late 1990s. But the family's claim were strengthened with revelations of DNA evidence that showed that Thomas Jefferson had a blood. Hold on one second. Yep, Thomas Jefferson had a evidence showed that Thomas Jefferson had a blood tie to the slave family from Monticello and was very likely had a sexual relationship with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. A long-standing assertion by Hemings' descendants that historians once derided. And that makes sense because, like I said, these slavers, they had their ways with our women. All right, they had their ways with our women whenever they wanted. You can literally just marry your woman. It was like, well, look, if you gonna marry this woman, you gonna have to marry her under the not even the United States, but under this basically supremacist statute. All right, you gonna have to be, if you want to be a conglomerate of America and you want some of these particular benefits or whatever you want to call it, it's the same way about signing your social security number on a job application. You need that in order to get a job. So in order to make a contract with these particular slavers, and to get married to your wife, you had to basically consent under their rule. And that's why a lot of Jakes got married to these women. But at the same time, right after you married your wife, the master, he could come in and pop her whenever and however he felt. And if you did something about it, they'll blow the back of your head off. Which shows you that this man is nothing but the damn devil, man. And you got Jakes out there that say, well, we ain't gonna get Edomite women in the concubine. Well, the scriptures say, do unto them as they done to us, and double, rend them double. So what do you mean we're not gonna have Edomite slaves in the kingdom? We're gonna have concubines. All right, we're gonna deal with the Edomite woman. We're gonna deal with the Moabite woman. We're gonna deal with the Ammonite woman. We're gonna deal with the Elamite woman. We're gonna deal with all these women, because technically they all belong to us anyway. Are we gonna marry them? No. Concubine just means lesser wife. We're gonna have our Israelite women in the kingdom that we're gonna primarily deal with, but when we feel like it, we're gonna put hell on their women just like they put hell on us and our women. It makes sense as an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So anybody that's teaching, oh, you ain't gonna deal with no Edomite in the kingdom, man, look, get out of here with that. You ain't gotta deal with the Edomites, all right? But we gonna put hell on these nations, and we gonna be kings, and we gonna rule in righteousness, and that's nothing unrighteous about dealing with a heathen, as long as you ain't marrying them, You Jakes, man, you got to get out your emotions. But anyway, it says here, and tomorrow came yesterday, it says here, Allen writes about our family's controversial claim in a novelistic style, weaving together both hard documentation and oral history. It says she describes, for instance, a woman named Jenny, the future mother of Venus, trapped on a slave ship. And the slaves could hear the howling winds as they stood with tortured souls. It says, as they stood with tortured souls and bodies, their faces grimacing, afraid of the next moment. Man. It says all that could be heard were blood-stilling shrieks and groans. Wow. All right. But it says once in a new world, Jenny eventually conceived and gave birth. Gazing up at the stars one night, she decided to name her little daughter Venus. But it says here, Jenny, the name Jenny indeed shows up in old records. So does Venus. But it says family stories say that Jenny was originally an African living in England who had somehow been kidnapped by a slave vessel, because even back then, when Columbus made his voyage over here to the west, oh my God, bro. I gotta go to the park, man, because I ain't gonna be able to focus when they're working on these fucking buildings. Slovakia, man. Issachar is really out there getting it in. Issachar, he don't play no games. When he works, he works. Yeah, that's Issachar out there getting it in, man. But anyway, Salakia, brothers. But anyway, it says, let me go up. It says kidnapped by a slave vessel, right? Because even then, when Columbus made his voyage over to the west, you got to understand, like, a couple hundred slaves he took back over to Spain and different parts of Europe, and they put them right in slavery. So a lot of our people went back to England, to Scotland, to Portugal and Spain, and they served slavery out there. So Jake was being transferred to and fro like sardines in a can, you know. But it says Allen had to use her imagination as she constructed some of the book's scenes, but mostly she relied on what she heard while she was growing up. It says, my grandmother Ford told me stories when she was alive, and I just wrote them down, Allen said. I didn't make it up. We always heard the story, and I put a little poetry in it. But now a grown woman, Venus accompanies her owner, Hannah Bushrod Washington, the wife of John Augustine Washington, the brother of the future president, on a visit to Mount Vernon. It says, there at night, the story goes, George Washington forced himself sexually on her, so he raped her, all right, which is not typical for Esau. It says, whether or not that the assertion is true, the baby born 9 months later would prove to be special, but he was a so-called black baby. He was a tear. But it says when a child was young, for instance, West Ford would attend church with George Washington, where he was given a private pew. But at 21, Ford was granted his freedom and later on something else besides, a large tract of land adjacent to Washington's estate, where he continued to serve as a faithful caretaker in the years leading up to the Civil War. All right, so he was a slave, but he didn't, he wasn't like as bad off as the other slaves, but nonetheless, he was black. They were like, we ain't dealing with it. But it says the most intriguing of all the images of Ford, it says reproduced on westfordlexi.com, he does indeed resemble America's first president. So there you go, and we can look at some of the pictures, man. All right, matter of fact, let me pull up something real quick. Let me pull up some of these pictures on this guy. Because it's just for edification purposes. All right. So look at him, man. These are basically West Ford, and he do look like George Washington. I mean, he's a darker version. Got that same stupid ass haircut. You don't look too far from him. You just look like a darker chocolate version of him. See, look. So it's coming out now that this guy was the son of George Washington, America's first president, at least documented. He was just a darker version because apparently the woman he dealt with, Venus, was a dark-skinned woman. But your lineage is through the father. So this is a chocolate Edomite right here. This is not a Jake. This is an Edomite. Like, you're going to have some people that are going to say, well, what if George Washington was an Israelite? Okay, what if he was an Israelite? So what? At the end of the day, he's not a man of the Lord. But George Washington was not an Israelite. He was an Edomite. I had to clear that up. Because at the same time, you got these portraits of these old presidents. You don't know what they really look like, but you just go off faith of these are the portraits of these men. Because I've heard that we've had a black president before, but I don't know how true that is. It's just something that, I have to research more upon. But nonetheless, this was common. Slavers always raped our women. I mean, they had their way with our women, and that's written in the scriptures. Like the scriptures say that the women should be ravished, and that's happening. All right, because it says a DNA test could shed light on the matter, but Allen said that she has been informed that a DNA sample would need to be taken from the hair of George Washington's mother and Mary Ball Washington, who was buried in Fredericksburg, Virginia. It says, not in my generation, I don't think we'll pursue it, but you can never tell in the next generation. But I personally won't ask them for DNA because I believe in the sanity of the dead. All right, which they may not go that far, because for the simple fact that, they don't really want this stuff to come out. But then again, this is not really a hidden secret anymore. All right, because it says here, West Ford, which was born in 1784, was an enslaved man of mixed race, which there's no such thing as mixed. He was an Edomite. His father was George Washington, so he was an Edomite. It says West Ford, caretaker of the historic Mount Vernon home to President George Washington, and proves that he was really disowned because he would have took upon the man's last name. But see, what happened was he didn't want that secret to get out, so I believe he kept her mother or whoever he was named after. If he kept the last name of that particular person, his last name wasn't Washington. And you got to ask yourself why. But anyway, like it says, Washington fatherhood's controversy, descendants of Ford maintained through their family oral history that West was the son of George Washington. It says this claim gained greater publicity after DNA tests supported the connection between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. However, the earliest reference to Ford's father being George Washington is from 1940. An article in Pittsburgh Courier said he was known as the Negro son of George Washington. Okay, so He looked like a Jake, but was an Edomite, basically a tear. All right. So 32 it says, thy sons and thy daughters should be given to another people, and thy eyes shall look and fill with longing for them all day long, and there should be no might in thy hand. All right. So this was part of that. You know, they basically took our women and raped us, and now our women, they willingly give themselves over to Esau. You know, like, you got to pay attention to when you send your kids to these institutions or these doctors, or, you know, these social workers. If you pay attention to the relationship these Edomites have with the Jake kids, it's real disturbing. Like, I remember 3 weeks ago, we sat at the camp in the park, and there was this one Jake boy, but he was with these weird Edomite looking couples. And I called it out on camera, matter of fact. So I'm like, what the hell is up with this picture? You know, I don't tell them what they was doing to that boy, man. You know? But anyway, nonetheless, this is the book of Matthew 13, and I'm going to start at verses 24. Matter of fact, yep, it started here, 24. It says, another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. It says, but while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And it's parabolic to our women dealing with these heathens. A tare is a person with an Israelite mother and a heathenistic father. Like, I believe, what was that guy's name? Not Herod, but was it not Antipater? It was Pilate, not Pilate. It may have been Herod, but I believe one of them had an Israelite mother. All right, but they had a Idumean father, which is an Edomite. I can't remember which Roman Caesar it was, but indeed he was a tare. All right, but it says here, but when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. It says, so servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, does not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then have tares? And he said unto them, an enemy have done this. All right, the enemy is Esau. It says, but he said, an enemy have done this. And the servant said to him, would thou then we go up and gather them up? But he said, nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat in them. Let them both harvest together, or together. It says, let them both grow together into the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them into bundles to burn them. But gather the wheat into thy barn. So the Lord is going to do the separating. You know, like, you ain't just going to go through and killing Edomites that look like Israelites, because for the simple fact, you never know. You may have some elect in there. You know, like, you got women out here that go and they'll sleep with Edomites and Jake. So she'll have like 6 kids, and 2 of them may belong to Edomite, 1 Arab, and 3 to Jake, you know, but yet they all look similar. So you can't just go through plucking them up all because, you know, she dealt with the dude. You know, you got to let the Lord do the division, because at the end of the day, that shame is going to fall upon her head for dealing with a heathen, because our women are not supposed to deal outside that race. They're not supposed to be dealing with white men, Arabs, Chinamen. They're not supposed to be dealing with that, but yet the black woman blatantly goes and does it. You know why? Because, hey, she's a devil. You know, and there's nothing more she would like to do than deal with a so-called white man. You know, because the black woman hates herself. You know, but nonetheless, in this case, she was raped. And when she was raped, you know, it's shit, what can you do about it? She had no control over it, especially back in the day. Slave women didn't really willingly give themselves over to Edomite supremacy. It just, they had no choice. Because if they didn't comply, they will be killed. All right? My last precept here. This is the book of Deuteronomy, the 9th chapter. Come on, phone. Deuteronomy 9. Come on, this thing is so fucking slow. Like, I literally hate this. But anyway, this is the book of Deuteronomy 9. And I'm going to start at verses, let's start at verses 10. It says, neither have we obeyed the voice of the Lord Yahweh, or Yahweh our power, to walk in his laws, which he set before us, his servants, the prophets. Okay. Yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured out upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses. And we're reading about these curses in the law of Moses. All right. This is the reason why we went into the book of Deuteronomy 28 and 30. All right. About the slaves lying with the women, our women of our nation. Okay, that's in the law of Moses, but we broke the laws of Moses, so therefore we had to face this captivity. Okay, which proves that the laws were still relevant, because if that was the case, if the law was going to be null and void, why did something that Moses wrote over 4,000 years ago come to play in this age, if that didn't have any type of importance on what we're supposed to do as a nation? And that's something you Christians can't answer. Okay? And it says here, therefore, the curse is poured upon us. And that's a curse when somebody is able to take your woman and rape her. That's a curse. It says, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of Yahweh, because we have sinned against him. And he confirmed his words which he spake against us. And they're being confirmed through these captivities. And against our judges that judge us by bringing upon us a great evil, which is the transatlantic slave trade. It says, for under the whole heaven have not been done as have been done up to Jerusalem. Okay? So that's the brunt of what you're reading. So all these slavery stories, like we've read stories in books that they don't even publish for real in public fact, that slaves, they used to literally nail slaves up by their rod and beat them until their fucking rods fall off. You know, they used to put these funnels as gags in their mouth, and they would let another slave shit in the mouth of a slave, and they would put a gag in that shit, man. How horrific is that? Getting your rods bit off and chopped off, and they stick it in your mouth, man. They put it in your rectum with a castrated rod, man. Esau used to do some crazy stuff. He used to piss in their mouth, deprecate on them. He did a lot of fucking shit to our people, man. We inherited that mindset, man. We came through trauma from that. That's why Jake is all messed up. So what you think we gonna do to they people and they women and their race? You know? And it says here, it is written in the law of Moses, all this evil will come upon us. That's how we can tell. That's how we able to prove that this is talking about the slave trade, because that's written in the law of Moses. Something that this clown, Vocal Malone, can't seem to get through his minuscule mind. It says, yet made we not our prayer before the Lord our power, that we may turn from our iniquities to understand thy truth. Therefore have the Lord watched upon us and brought it upon us. It says, have watched upon the evil and brought it upon us. For Yahweh our power is righteous in all his works which he doth, for we have not obeyed his voice. All right, so with that, all praises and glory and honor is due to Yahweh Bashim, Yahushua Bashim Kakadash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings and salutations to the hopeful elect. And with that, Shalom and a Baba Ball.